We're here once again to talk with Michael Arnowitt about one of his uh, compelling piano programs. This one has an astonishing element, which is a movement of Mahler's symphony. Michael, over to you. How did that come to be?
Right, this is the first movement of his Ninth Symphony, which is, of course, for a gargantuan orchestra, right? And, but alas, there's no piano. There's no piano in most symphonic pieces, and there's no piano in this piece either. There are a couple of harps, but alas, I don't play that. So there's no way for me to ever play this music that I truly, truly love. I've loved it from childhood, and I've revisited it from time to time in my life. But only way to do it is if there's a piano transcription for it from the orchestral music over to piano. And a man in the UK named Ian Farrington, I found out a year or two ago, has done just that. So got his version of it. I've tweaked it and modified it by studying the score. And after many hours chatting it in the piano studio, I'll be premiering that on this program that I call Crossroads in three performances in the United States, in the New England states, coming up at the beginning of December.
I'm just going to say those dates so that people who are listening can hear them. Friday, December 1st, 7:30 p.m., St. Paul's Cathedral, Burlington, Vermont. The next night, Saturday, December 2nd, afternoon, December 2nd at 2 p.m., Chandler Center for the Arts in Randolph, Vermont. And the next evening, Sunday, December 3rd, 7 p.m., Nordic Hall, Scandinavian Cultural Center, Newton, Massachusetts, near Boston.
Right.
So back to
Mahler.
back to Mahler.
Oh God, I've been obsessed. There are people that do gravitate to Mahler. I guess I have the bug. I gradually bought the recordings of his symphonies when I was a kid, and then I did a crazy thing that I transferred it from all these LPs onto cassettes. So I had a little box with all 10 of his symphonies actually. And then one night I just listened to them all back to back. So I had my headphones on. Nobody knew, my parents, my brother, nobody knew I was doing this. And I just simply listened to essentially his entire, he wrote a few songs, but essentially he devoted his whole life to writing these magnificent symphonies. And yeah, I don't know, what do you think of that?
Did that take all night long? You were just listening in the night? Or how old were you?
Yeah, pretty much. I don't know. I was a teenager, maybe 14 or something like that.
Were you under the influence of that great popularizer Leonard Bernstein, who
We had,
popularized the Mahler grooves?
yeah. But I bought different recordings, or rather, in those days, I was begging my mother to, can we buy
Yeah,
this at these record shops in Massachusetts, where I grew up. But there's kind of an interesting uh, one sentence back and forth with Mahler and Sibelius, which you may have heard, where Mahler said, a symphony must be the world, and Sibelius said, a symphony must be a world. And that's kind of a nice...
what a difference between the definite and indefinite article.
Yeah, because if
Yeah,
you listen to a Sibelius symphony and you are drawn into a world that he definitely creates for you, and it's got a lot of fantasy. But with Mahler, you are in the human world that we know, and you have all the bustle of life, of society. You have nature too, of course,
yeah,
but it's so specific to our human world that we know and live in, and the emotions that we have and all of our imperfections and our vulnerabilities, and it's all there in this sort of encyclopedic uh, attempt that Mahler made, and maybe no symphony did he do it best than in the Ninth Symphony, particularly in the first movement, which is some 25 minutes long.
yeah.
So,
You had
okay,
asked me to read an excerpt from
yeah,
a letter by Alban Berg, who was a young composer who got to view the score in manuscript of the Ninth Symphony and wrote to his wife this letter. Beautiful quote. Once again, I have played through the score of Mahler's Ninth Symphony. The first movement is the most magnificent thing Mahler ever wrote. It is the expression of a tremendous love for this earth, the longing to live in peace on it, to enjoy nature to its depths before death comes. For death is inevitable. This whole movement is permeated by premonitions of death, which makes itself known again and again over the movement's course. It is the culmination of everything on earth and in dreams, with ever more intense eruptions following the most gentle passages, and of course, this intensity is strongest in the colossal moment where death becomes a certainty, where, in the middle of the deepest, most poignant longing for life, death itself is announced with the greatest force.
Trombones there, right?
Yes. Against that, there is no resistance. For the last time, Mahler turns towards the earth, not to battles and deeds, which he brushes off, but rather totally and only to nature, to drink this air, this purest earthly air, with deeper and deeper breaths.
Wow.
Do you think that...
What a letter, right?
Yeah, do you think that that letter and that piece of music could have come from any other time than one of your favorite musical eras, which is around the time of the First World War in the 19-teens?
Yeah, actually call this program Crossroads because that's kind of my favorite time of music and world and social history. And Mahler wrote this maybe about 4 years or so before World War I broke out, and the world was really a world on edge, and this is such an intense piece of music, and true pleasure to get a chance to finally play it.
I have a question about your repertoire. I've heard lots of your playing over the years, and I wonder what it is that makes a transcription of Mahler more compelling to you than that first great includer of the whole world, Liszt, who seemed to, travel out into the world and try to capture everything that was there and put it into the piano and splash it up on a big screen to become famous and show the whole world what art was really about. You don't go so much for Liszt, is that right?
That has been the story of my life, yes.
Everybody else does.
You're correct, and I guess Liszt has a lot of pieces with flowery titles, like the particular locations in different countries of Europe, but Mahler isn't really about that. It's sure he does have a nature element to it, and you can tell he's Austrian and by some of those references, but he's really talking about humans and our experiences, our emotions, our society. I really feel, and the cosmic things, and he talks about, but he's composing music.
Expressing, I think.
He has passages about loneliness that are just amongst the most beautiful passages that have ever been written, and it's a difficult experience to encapsulate in music, loneliness, but it's so central to our life. And Mahler also does, in his orchestration, does the most delicate chamber music type of things. Like he has an extended passage that all you're hearing is like one flute, one horn, the one flute way up high, one horn in the middle, and the bass is really down low, and that's it. Like the other 70 people in the orchestra are completely silent,
right?
And it's the opposite of bombast, right?
Uh-huh.
So and it was very, very forward-looking for its time, and influenced a lot of orchestral music that composers wrote, in the 100 years between Mahler and today, right?
Yes.
So, which could be a segue into our
Yeah, I was interested in making
Yeah.
going from the tiny little orchestration to one of the things that happened naturally when the world was destroyed by World War One. The Stravinsky's uh, Rite of Spring was
just
no
before.
longer something that could be commissioned. So Stravinsky did tinier little pieces, and in the same world as Mahler, you have a young friend of his, Schoenberg, who was writing pieces that didn't look to include the whole world, but that were these little tiny piano pieces that were uh, pointillistic and that were, as I understand it, connected to Kandinsky's formal painting experiment.
They were friends. Yeah, they were friends, and it's so interesting that in this exact same slice of history, you had Schoenberg who would start to write the first music, abandoning tonality, abandoning writing music in a key that had been for hundreds of years, right? Many hundreds of years been written that way, and he took the plunge to write something new. And Kandinsky is largely credited with being the first painter to create a complete painting of abstract art. Maybe he wasn't, I guess there's debate.
Well, I mean,
but they were friends, and
I remember
they talked about
one
art.
Of those, one of those abstract paintings that clearly has musical inspiration. Like it clearly seems to have a piano in the middle of it. Like, okay, fine, abstract, but I see that piano.
I guess it wasn't that abstract if you could see piano.
Yeah.
Yeah, and actually, I'm going to bring a book to this concert where people can see not only some of Schoenberg's own paintings, because at this point in Schoenberg's life, this is kind of near the beginning of his adult composing career. He was also doing a lot of painting, and so you can see some of his expressionist paintings, and you can also see some sketches and a final painting that Kandinsky made at a concert of Schoenberg's music that he saw in Munich, and one of the pieces I'm going to play on the program, Schoenberg's Opus 11, number 1, was played at this concert that Kandinsky attended, and he started doing some sketches. I don't know if it's the same painting you're talking about or not.
Well, my memory, since it's a long time since I've been a music critic, my memory was something like that. That if you were a painter, it might be natural in the old time to make a painting or a sketch of, say, an evening of songs at Schubert's place, because you would see not the music, but the social scene and the people, and you could identify the people even. But in Kandinsky's case, he's, I think, trying to capture what the music looks like in a total abstract way.
Yeah, well,
that's a whole other thing.
I would say we're kind of at this point in history with both Kandinsky and Schoenberg at this point, around 1910, 1911, where they haven't quite taking the bathing suit off and gone nude into the ocean. They're about there, but They haven't quite made the jump into the abyss. So yeah, in the Kandinsky painting, you see like maybe backs of heads, but the piano has been abstracted, but maybe like you say, you can still see it. Might be a piano there, but the form has changed, and that's what they did back then at that point, and I love the music from that time period, and I think it's some of Schoenberg's best music, and like you say, they're actually little miniatures. They're like poetry.
And they're so tiny that you, even if you don't like Schoenberg, you can just like, oh, okay, that was it, and it's it doesn't repeat itself, doesn't develop. It's kind of just there. And it's refreshing in its way, right?
Yeah, well, I'm a believer. I hope to. I hope people like it too. I did actually learn the set of 6 small piano pieces, Opus 19, when I was a teenager. So I had an amazing first piano teacher, Mr. Angel Ramon Rivera in Boston, and he taught me these pieces that now, all these many, many, many years later, I like to program them from time to time. And the 6th one of the set, of the 6 small piano pieces, Schoenberg actually composed after returning home from attending Mahler's funeral in 1911. So it was just like instant. He came back home, he was inspired, and he wrote this delicate, beautiful piece. And but the two are connected. There's a nice story about Mahler defending Schoenberg against a heckler when Schoenberg had a string quartet premiered, and people were booing and hissing, and people were cheering, and there was all this riot and scandalous thing going on in this concert hall in Vienna, and Mahler stood up. There was this guy who was really giving Schoenberg grief, and it's like this guy, this heckler, went in front of the front row and of the audience and was really hissing at Schoenberg, and Mahler went up and said, "I'd just like to see the person who hisses," and got right in the heckler's face, and the heckler almost was about to punch Mahler, and then the stage manager came in and broke it up. But yeah, so Mahler did defend Schoenberg, even though he didn't really understand the new music,
right?
But it was all part of that scene.
Freedom to express yourself in the way that you need to. In a kind of a twist of fate, you're working with one of the best known forgotten composers, Arthur Lourié, who's a Russian emigre, and we can see his pieces are from the same era.
Yeah,
and
roughly.
A little bit more traditional names and
some
styles, maybe.
Some are right before World War I, some are after. I picked 3. And Lourié has this sort of biographical arc that I seem to like, of people who were composers who were born in Russia, and then they made a pit stop in Paris in the early 20th century, and then they made another travel and immigrated to the United States, where they were spent a lot of the rest of their life in obscurity. But there are a couple of composers that match that biographical profile that I love, these people. And so this guy Arthur Lourié is a composer I've been fascinated with, and although what did I call him? The one of the best forgotten composers of the 20th century. But people have been rediscovering his music, and I'm amongst a group of pianists and other musicians that are trying to get it back out there in more recent years. And
when Lourié writes a Mazurka, for instance, we probably can't avoid thinking of Chopin and traditional, harking to the traditional Polish dance. So how does Lourié interpret that's different from the music of almost a century earlier?
Well, one thing is, you will hear the dance rhythms occasionally, for sure, but it's more in a dream world-scape, I guess. And sometimes he also, not so much in an obvious way as Schoenberg, but he does play with this little border, the tantalizing border between tonal music and atonal music without key. And so sometimes you're in G minor, like that piece is, and sometimes you feel like, where are we? And it is very dreamlike in that way. There's some elements of Lourié's music that's rather childlike, and I'm talking about really early child, like toddler almost. And it's you kind of clumping around on the piano in these little clusters, but it's just very delicate and interesting and creative. And there are other moments that are super adult and very mature and absolutely sophisticated and beautiful. But the combination I like. And so I've selected 3 that will be on this program, and that is also from this crossroads time between the old and the new.
We talked earlier about your working with the music of Victoria Poleva, who is a living Ukrainian. so the world's different. We've just gone through a worldwide pandemic health event that's a little bit similar to the influenza epidemic in the time that you're talking about, and and uh, and I noticed that you were talking about early childhood. When we talked earlier, we were talking about some very early childhood memories of Victoria Poleva's, uh, having to do with how she heard music when she was almost in a dream state, and her parents didn't quite understand what that was all about.
Yeah, that's a great
Somehow they
point.
trusted her enough to support her. What's the difference between um, Vienna, where the world had a cultural center and Mahler and Schoenberg and Berg were in it,
Yeah.
and now you don't get to go for coffee with Victoria Poleva? How do you connect?
Yeah, well, it took a while, but I did connect with her through some intermediaries, I guess. And in the early part of 2022, so as we tape this, that must be like about almost 2 years ago, she was really generous and she sent me maybe about a dozen of her piano compositions, which I believe are unpublished and not much represented online either. But she's a very well-known composer in Europe in particular, and she's done some great orchestral music, and she's been on a Kronos Quartet album and Guido Kramer album, and so she's definitely very well known. But these piano pieces maybe not. So I thought, well, this is great. I love her music, and I find her music very, very absorbing, and it's got a spiritual element to it. It's got a dramatic element to it. She's got a kind of a mysterious, almost cryptic element at times, and I just like how it's all put together. So I thought, well, I should learn some of these pieces she sent me, and it turned out she sent these pieces to me like 2 weeks before Russia invaded Ukraine. So just the timing was really incredible. So I'll be playing two pieces that she wrote on this particular set of programs, and the first one's called Ischia Island, which is the name of an island near Naples in Italy. One thing I like about her music is she uses sort of this idea of overlapping, which I'm beginning to notice more and more even in other composers. But like she'll have a melodic line, and there'll be another melodic line that will come in, but the two will kind of overlap slightly. So I liken it to like in a relay race where you have like runner number one, and runner number one passes the baton to runner number two, but there's this little moment of overlap, right, where they're both grasping the same baton, that's the stick that's being
They
passed.
have to match their strides and collaborate.
And there's this little moment of overlap, and I think really good composers do this all the time. And the second piece I'm playing also has some examples of that. That the second piece is called Sonata quasi una fantasia, and which is actually the official title of Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, if you didn't know that. Of course, Beethoven didn't call his Moonlight Sonata the Moonlight Sonata, but he called it Sonata quasi una fantasia, meaning it's a sonata, but sort of a fantasy. And this piece, maybe it has the Beethovenian explosive moments at times, but I also hear some Bach influence on it as well. The famous Chaconne for solo violin that Bach wrote, I feel some bassline connection and harmony and textural connection in Victoria Poleva's piece. I don't know if that's really there or my imagination, but she does some overlapping in that piece too, where she might overlap major and minor. So my right hand might be playing in a major, some music in major key, and underneath it she'll put a minor chord, but maybe she'll make it be like really quiet. So the combination is really striking, and she does some really beautiful things like that. And so I've been playing this music over the last year or so and trying to raise appreciation of her music in our part of the world, so Canada and the United States. And
We're talking here about Michael Arnowitt's upcoming program, Crossroads, the usual eclectic programming
Okay.
of piano music from all over the place. And do you have any final words to say other than encouraging people to come and listen for themselves?
I'll just briefly mention that I'm playing some short pieces by Debussy and Bach and the Polish composer Lutoslawski. So if you like any of those composers, they'll be represented too on the program. And I really hope that people will come hear me give these concerts in New England and
Come up and say hello.
yeah, absolutely. Yep. I don't bite. So I'll be happy to chat with people at the conclusion of these concerts. And you want to just give them one more reading of where they are and when? If you
One
got that
more
in front
reading
you.
of
Yeah. Where and when? Yeah.
the dates. We start in Burlington, Vermont, Friday, December 1st, 7:30 p.m. at St. Paul's Cathedral. Next afternoon is Randolph, Vermont, Saturday, December 2nd, 2 p.m. at the Chandler Center for the Arts. And the next evening is in Newton, Massachusetts, Sunday, December 3rd, 7 p.m., Nordic Hall at the Scandinavian Cultural Center in Newton. Thanks very much, Michael, and bon voyage.
Thanks, Alan. It's nice having a conversation with you and enjoyed it.
Thanks.